it's interesting to wonder what would have happened if Xerox had obtained patent protection and hadn't let Steve Jobs just walk in the door.
Welcome to the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show, and I'm your host, Richard Wray. My mission is to help entrepreneurs understand AI and use it to their advantage. Join me today where we dig deep with our guest and get you the best concepts and strategies. Today's special guest is Robert Plotkin. Robert is a patent attorney who has worked with innovative companies for over 25 years. His latest book describes his unique method of leveraging IP to drive business success for growing AI companies. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. I'm really glad to be here.
Robert, really great to have you here. Where in the world are you?
I'm in the New York metropolitan area.
A place that I love. I've spent a lot of time there. It's one of my favorite parts of the world, without a shadow of a doubt. Wonderful place to be.
Thank you.
So, Robert, today we're going to be talking about, securing the future of your AI company with strategic IP. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background, what's your history, and how did you get to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, my background is in computer science. When we were prepping for the show, we both mentioned that our first computers that we worked with was the TRS-80, or
yes, indeed.
Which
we
affectionately called the Trash 80.
Yes,
because even back then, by the standards of those days in the late 70s, early 80s, it was not very good. But I started programming.
How dare you? It was wonderful. I will fight you for that one.
Of course, it blew my mind, and it's what got me hooked on computers. So I have to thank it for that. And I started programming in BASIC. Went on to C and other languages, and it really got me hooked and helped me develop my passion for computers. I went on to study computer science at MIT here on the East Coast, and then went straight to law school, became a patent attorney, and I've been doing that for over 25 years. Focusing on obtaining patents for software, including AI. And as you said, I work with innovative tech companies, obtaining patent protection for them and leveraging that patent protection for the growth of their businesses.
So a classic underachiever, very clearly. I think one of the things that you said there is really interesting. You've mixed two very, very important fields. So you've got that strong understanding on the technology side, but you have also brought in the law side and blended the two. It sounds very successfully. Can you give me any examples of some of the companies or the style of companies that you've worked with?
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of startup companies over the years, often with the founders before they've even formed a legal entity like a corporation. When they've had the idea, maybe they're still in school, and then they form the entity all the way through when the company gets acquired or goes public or has some other form of successful exit. On the other end, I've worked with major international companies, 3M, 3Com, Tata Consultancy Services in India, HP have been clients of mine, and pretty much everything in between. And I work in different ways with those companies, but on the AI front, most of the clients I'm working with these days are those small to mid-sized growing companies. So I really enjoy working with, in part because with them, I get to work side by side with the founders or executives to develop and execute their strategy for protecting and helping to grow their company with intellectual property.
Very interesting. So it sounds like you're really in the middle of this gold rush, this tsunami of AI and all the innovative ideas that are floating around. You're helping people with that specific area. Because I've been through some of this myself, and somebody's got a great idea, they manage to build something, and then it's like, well, what, we need a lawyer? So, how do you end up getting involved with these different organizations?
Yeah, a lot of startup founders and executives, understandably, they are focused on those key things that keep them up at night, which is what? Raising money. That's one of the first things.
Without a doubt.
Developing their technology and making it into a product that customers want and are ready to pay for, what's called product to market fit. Generating revenue and becoming profitable quickly enough that they, right before they run out of that money that they've raised, attracting top talent, which is very scarce in the AI world these days, and then eventually achieving an exit, which is usually in the form of an acquisition or a merger or an IPO. Those are the things that founders are focused on. They're putting all their energy into. The thing I help them with is sometimes a bit of an afterthought, which is, how do you protect your company against competition, which is so fierce? And it can come from any direction. It can come from the top, the biggest tech companies in the world, which have been known to observe what small companies are creating and innovating with, and then saying, oh, I like that new feature, and then just incorporating it into their own products. And because of their greater market share and customer relationships and channels, are able often to put small companies out of business overnight. And that's one place where patents and other forms of intellectual property can really help to protect a small company against that kind of much, much larger competitor. But it's also what you'd call horizontally. There's tons and tons of other startups out there trying to do the same thing. So intellectual property can help you against, protect yourself against those peers of yours.
That is really important, because let's face it, you could have come up with a genuinely brilliant idea. It's very rarely unique. And there are going to be other people out there trying to do the same things. Going back to the computer world, obviously, we look at what's happening with a PC and on a Mac, and that goes back to the days of Xerox PARC, when the early kind of interfaces that most people are used to these days were first demonstrated a very, very long time ago. So, these things do happen for sure. The interesting thing that you're saying, though, is we've got so many different things happening across the board. Have you come across any good examples that you can mention where somebody...
It's interesting to wonder what would have happened if Xerox had obtained patent protection for that technology, or had kept it as trade secrets for a while and hadn't let Steve Jobs just walk in the door and take it and visited Xerox PARC and saw their graphical user interface, which we now all have experienced for decades in the form of Windows and graphical user interfaces with buttons and menus and all that. That stuff didn't exist before. He saw that and said, wow, that looks great. And he went ahead and implemented it in Apple's products. And Xerox famously really didn't have intellectual property protection for any of that. And that's what enabled Apple and later Microsoft to incorporate those features without Xerox having any real ability to stop them or to obtain any licensing revenue to at least get compensation for its core innovations being used by those other companies. It's interesting to wonder what would have happened if Xerox had obtained patent protection for that technology, or had kept it as trade secrets for a while and hadn't let Steve Jobs just walk in the door and take a tour and see all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing to think of there. A huge company like Xerox, and we are talking, a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company, and this guy walks in one day, sees something, he's operating out of his garage and goes, hey, I like that. So the big guys can be hurt by this just as much as the little guys.
Yeah, absolutely. The flip side of every challenge is an opportunity, right? So the big guys can be hurt by it, and that means it's an opportunity for small, upstart, nimble companies. I mean, there are some downsides to being a big company. Very often they move slowly.
Yes.
Very often, although they create really powerful platforms these days, like ChatGPT has become a platform, OpenAI may not have the resources or be focused on all of the applications of that platform to specific uses in particular industries or to specific types of customers. And those are often the places where small companies have an opportunity to innovate and to really grab some market share and grow.
That is great. So for anybody that's listening or watching the show, what's the process when somebody comes along to you and says, hey, we're building an amazing app, we've got this great idea, but somebody said we need to talk to a lawyer. Help.
Yeah, I mean, even before you speak to a lawyer, the first thing is give some real careful thought to answering the questions for yourself. What are our innovative features that we developed? What makes our technology different from the competition? What motivated us to develop something innovative? And that almost always comes from the fact that you looked at the marketplace and you saw a gap, you saw a problem, a need that wasn't being met by the competition. I mean, that's what motivates innovators. Answer those questions really clearly, and then answer, what is it about the solution we've come up with that gives us some competitive advantage? What is it about how we've implemented this or are planning to implement it that's going to make customers want to come to us? If you can do some of that homework, so to speak, for yourself before you come to a lawyer like me, it'll help make the conversation that we have a lot more productive. And the other thing I tell a lot of people is, patent protection isn't the right type of protection for all companies, but it's worth you having a conversation with an intellectual property lawyer for a couple of reasons. One, it may be that trade secret protection, or there might be trademark protection you could benefit from. And so it's worth having the conversation. And in some cases where patents are applicable, they can be extremely powerful, and they may be the best way you have to protect yourself against those peers and bigger companies from competing against you, and even not just protecting, but giving you an asset in the form of patents that can increase the value of your company so that when you go to get acquired by a big company, you'll have something more solid, tangible, demonstrable, and valuable to show them and sell to them.
When you were describing the kind of process that you go through earlier on, you mentioned the exit. And it sounds very much that the exit could be not just walking away from the company with hopefully a lot of money in your pocket. It could be the exit is from a stage in the evolution of this service or product that you're creating, which could be to be purchased by a larger company.
Yeah, absolutely. Different founders or investors or board members have different plans for their companies. There are some companies that don't really want an exit in the form of an acquisition or to go public. They just want to grow the company organically and keep it going forever. But even there, a strong intellectual property portfolio will help you to keep away the competition from eating into your market share. But if you do want an exit in the form of a merger or an IPO, and even if you then want to continue running the company after that, you're right. It's the intellectual property will form a really important part of the value of the company. I'll give you an example, which is I often have founders come to me at an early stage. They tell me what they have. We talk about patent protection, and they say, we only want to patent for us in the U.S. because that's where they're founded and that's where they're going to be doing business. And I say, well, what's your exit strategy? And they say, oh, well, we want to be acquired by a Microsoft or a Google. And I say, well, do you think if they acquired you, they might find it valuable to acquire patents that you have obtained or are seeking in other countries where they do business? And then they say, oh, I see what you mean. If you can at least file patent applications or preserve your rights in multiple companies, you can make your patent portfolio more value for your future acquirers who are most likely going to be doing business in multiple countries. So if you need to think ahead and build a portfolio that has that value for your future acquirers.
And with the way that the world works these days, we're all interconnected. You're in America, I'm in Australia. We're talking, somebody could see your product, Steve Jobs style with Xerox PARC, and just create something different, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Right. And, in the case of software, and a lot of AI is cloud-based, it might be running on a server in one country and be accessible to customers at a different country. And for that reason, international intellectual property protection is becoming much more important than it was in the old days when you were just manufacturing and selling physical products in one place.
Now, that makes complete sense. So in the world of AI right now, undoubtedly, and you've mentioned them yourselves, the most well-known product is going to be ChatGPT. And a lot of people may be thinking now, well, why do I need to talk to this guy or even read his book? I can just ask ChatGPT how I do all this. How do you respond to
that? If you're talking about how to obtain patent protection, like in any field, I would ask anyone who asks that question, think about your own field and the kinds of really nuanced experience-based expertise you've developed in both developing and executing strategies, where to make things really successful, I am sure you in your own field have gone far beyond what ChatGPT can tell you, which is going to be very generic across the board knowledge, which can be extremely valuable, but is not going to be enough to distinguish you from your competition. And it's the same thing with intellectual property protection. You, as a client of mine, potential future client of mine, you can gain a lot of great knowledge about intellectual property protection, but it's going to be fairly generic. Where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is in how to apply that generic knowledge to the very specific situation that you are in right now as it evolves. And developing and executing that kind of strategy to your very specific situation is something that, at least as of today, ChatGPT still can't really do all that well.
I think this is a very important thing to get into people's minds. All of these tools out there, ChatGPT, Gemini from Google, and all the other variations out there, yes, they can do some amazing things. And I think the benefit here could be they can help educate somebody, but they shouldn't be there to do very specialized jobs. And in the case of what you're doing, you've got the history of working in that industry, you've got law, you've got IT behind you. That is not something that can really be pulled together in the same way with AI and know those nuances that really are going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely. We could have a whole separate conversation about the general trend that that software, information technology, now AI, have taken us on, starting from commoditizing information to then commoditizing what's often called knowledge. Maybe now you could say ChatGPT has started to commoditize a little bit of skill and maybe process knowledge, but you can go to higher and higher levels to eventually what you'd call wisdom. The ability to take into account all of the facts of a specific situation. In my case, to take into account the preferences, the needs, the goals, the personalities of my clients. What their dreams are, what their vision is, what their constraints are, what their resources are. All of these and a lot of the human factors, and take all of that into account, again, to develop and execute collaboratively with them an intellectual property strategy that's going to achieve their specific goals. That's something that still AI can't do. I never say never, maybe someday.
There are lots of artists out there that were going years ago, a computer will never take my job, and then along comes Midjourney and DALL-E 3, etc. So yes, I get you entirely.
Yeah. So we're not there yet, but and that's why it's really important to still work with professionals in whatever problem you're trying to tackle.
You mentioned something which I think everybody should really understand, which is the human factor. When you're working with your clients, you mentioned the personalities of the clients. It might be that the two people working in a company don't get on together. It might be that one of them is not available on Saturday and Sunday. Taking all these really subtle, nuanced things into account is so difficult. And the ability of a human to do that and notice when somebody's a bit grumpy or notice when somebody's, dealing with stuff outside of work is something that is still unique to humans. So I think that glimmer of hope that AI is not going to take over the world and take all our jobs, you actually described it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a service profession, and there's a lot of service professions out there. And although most of my clients are companies, behind every company is a set of people, right? It's still people working with people. Even if it's if I'm in a B2B business, it's still a person-to-person business. And the more I work over the years, the more I see how valuable and critical and important it is for me to be understanding my clients as people, and to learn about them, to again understand their goals, their preferences. You can have two companies developing very, very similar technology, but they might have very different business goals. The individual decision makers there might have very different preferences just about how they do things. So you look at, as we've talked about, some of the biggest tech companies in the world, you might think, if they're a huge multinational corporation, the individual personalities in them can't count for very much. But then mention Steve Jobs. I mean, look at so many companies where what makes them succeed or fail, or just what course they take, is very much driven by the individuals within them. And that's why that influences how a service professional like I will work, or what should work, if I want to be successful and help my clients be successful.
Again, going on the Steve Jobs angle, you look at Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, both very, very similar style of products, both successful in their own ways, but very, very different personalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the same lesson for the clients I work with, those tech companies. A lot of people who run or start tech companies, they think of what they're doing as a purely technological endeavor, and they're trying to solve a technical problem. And that's a great and amazing thing. But where they sometimes then run into a roadblock or a plateau is when they're trying to figure out why that product is not becoming commercially successful. And very often, one of those reasons is they're not understanding their customers, right, as people, and where those customers are and what their needs are and what their problems are. They're purely seeing things from a technical perspective. Now, solving that's not my expertise, but just another example of what we're talking about, the need to understand people and see them where they are, meet them where they are, and address their problems. And, going back to, we talk about intellectual property, when I wrote the latest book that I have, I really drew on what I learned about my clients' most common problems, goals, pain points, if you will. And that's why I mentioned the generating revenue, raising funds, getting investment, protecting against competitors, large and small. I found over and over again, achieving a successful exit. These are the things that both keep my clients up at night and that they are trying to achieve. And that's what I try to address in the book and in my work with clients, rather than just offering them a patent as a product, a generic product off the shelf. Instead, what I do when I work with clients is use that as a tool to help them achieve those goals or solve those pain points, whatever they may be.
So your latest book is called AI Armor, Securing the Future of Your AI Company with Strategic Intellectual Property. Tell us a bit more about it, and did you use AI to write it?
So I'll tell you a bit about the book. It talks about, as I said, using intellectual property as a strategic business tool to achieve business goals. And I've repeated them a few times now. Yeah. But, attracting investment, achieving successful exits, attracting top talent and employees who are so rare these days. And the reason I wanted to write the book is not only because it describes some very AI-specific intellectual property strategies, which it does, but also because it has this focus on using patents and other kinds of AI to achieve those business goals, rather than to use IP for what it's often used for, which is very often in a company, the company creates some new invention, a new piece of software, a new AI chatbot. And let's say the management knows or decides to get a patent. They go to a patent attorney, the patent attorney talks to the inventors, writes a patent, and gets it. And very often that patent sits on a shelf. In the old days, it would be on a piece of paper, literally sitting on a shelf, and it collects dust. And the company feels satisfied that it got this patent, and it does nothing for the company. And maybe if it does anything, it serves a defensive purpose, which is that if a competitor ever does anything in the future that infringes the patent, the company pulls the patent out and uses it in defense. But what I found in working with clients is that patents can be used much more proactively without having to wait years for infringement. And instead, I work with clients to file patent applications, obtain patents that they then use when they're pitching themselves to investors to show the protection that the company has, so that when the investor asks them, what is your moat? What's your protection against the competitor? What's going to stop a Microsoft or a Google from just seeing what you have and copying it for free, right? And incorporating into their own products? They can point to their patents as one answer to what is your moat. So, and that's one example of using IP to attract and obtain investment proactively. So it's what I describe in the book is a very different way of using IP as a tool for achieving business goals rather than just defensively, kind of like an insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one analogy I use. Why do you obtain a fire insurance policy on your home or your business? So that in the event that there is a fire, you can pull that insurance policy out and use it. But 9 times out of 10, you're paying a really expensive premium and that policy never pays off, right? And that's what most patents are like when they're used in this generic way and not being used strategically to advance business goals.
So there's having a patent and there's using a patent, two very, very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And to use a patent effectively, you need to decide up front, why are you obtaining a patent? And that answer is going to differ for different companies.
Mm-hmm.
I often use the analogy to Peter Lynch, the investment guru from Fidelity, who said, for your every investment, right, know what you own, know why you own it. If you just buy up stocks willy-nilly because they're the hottest new thing, you're probably not going to be very successful. So same thing for a patent. You could have a patent for many different reasons. It could be to protect you against the big gorilla in your industry. It could be to raise money. It could be to increase the value of your company for an acquisition. It can be to obtain patents for marketing value so that you can promote the fact that you have a patent portfolio, and that can provide you with some marketing benefit. You might have one or more of these reasons, and the reason you're seeking patent protection is going to influence which inventions you seek patent protection for, how you apply for that patent protection, how many patents you obtain. The goals will influence the IP strategy. And if you don't know your goals up front, you're going to be, navigating a course without a rudder. And you may obtain some patents, but they're probably not going to have a high return on investment, and they won't help you achieve your business goals.
And how long will a patent last for?
20 years from the filing date, which in the case of most software and AI is a really long time. It's, in the case of most software, it's much longer than you'll need it for. Although interestingly, it's not always the case. The RSA encryption algorithm, which was the foundation for the company RSA Security, that was patented early on. And it was such a fundamental and groundbreaking encryption algorithm that the patent on that, which lasted for 20 years, was still, the algorithm was still very much widely in use when the patent expired. That's not very common, but it does happen.
So can you actually extend a patent, or is it a case of it's 20 years, and if you haven't done something with it by then, hard luck?
Yeah, you cannot truly extend the life of a patent, but what you can do is if you have made improvements to the invention, and those improvements are significant enough to merit patent protection on their own, then you can obtain protection for those. And that's typically how companies will not quite extend the term of a patent, but achieve a similar result.
And just flipping it on its head for a moment then. So have you come across examples where people have just come up with as many patents as possible? Somebody who's smart, they're reading the market, and they think to themselves, I'm going to create a whole bunch of patents and just sit on them. I'm not going to bother investing any time, money, or effort in developing them. I'm just going to wait for the money to come to me.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that does happen. It requires a lot of foresight, which many people do not have. But if you are able to read the direction of a certain industry and see where it's heading, you do need some real inventive skill, because to write, file, and obtain a patent, the patent has to describe a real invention and how to make it work. But if you can do that ahead of the competition and obtain patents that cover a technology that later starts being put into real products and services by other companies. Now, you said wait for the money to come to you. You do have to make some real effort to get that money to come to you by reaching out to those companies in a usually walk softly and carry a big stick manner can be one way to do it, and say, look, I have these patents. Believe you infringe them, and seek licensing agreements with them. And, in some cases, if those companies don't want to pay, you can pursue the option of suing and engaging in patent litigation, which is a whole other story. I do have clients who have done that and are doing that now. Particularly in the U.S., patent litigation is a really time-consuming, expensive, resource-intensive effort. But the reason that companies sometimes do it, and I have clients who sometimes do it, is the payoff can be really, really big as well if there are companies infringing on your patents at a large scale.
Yes, I read an article one time where it described Atari, maybe because of some of the things that they developed in the early days, even had a patent on scrolling of all things. Now, how true that is, I don't know, but there was these occasions when Atari wasn't doing so well. And so, they could live off of what was sat on that list of patents they had from back in the day, back in the 1970s. So obviously we're well past that 20-year cutoff date though now.
Yeah, and look, it's another way to look at patents, which is that they can help your company hedge its bets. I hate to say that if one of your listeners has a company that it might not succeed commercially, but that does happen with startup companies or other companies. But if you have a patent portfolio that survives, in fact, very often when a startup company, let's say, runs out of funds before it can really take off commercially, often the only remaining asset of value that it has is its intellectual property. And that intellectual property can then be sold or licensed and at least generate some value and revenue for the founders, for the initial investors, for other people where there's no other assets that have any such value.
There may be some younger listeners today who are going, who on earth is this Atari company that this guy's talking about? But, I think we both know what they are. So, Robert, tell me, if there's one piece of advice, because you've given so many great pieces of advice and your book sounds amazing too, but if there's one piece of advice that people should take away from today's call, what would it be?
If you're at a company that's developing any kind of innovative technology, whether it be software, AI, new materials, new drugs, whatever it might be, at least contact an intellectual property attorney for a conversation to determine whether there might be some value in obtaining intellectual property for you. If it ends up as a result of that conversation that there isn't anything, no harm, no foul. But I would hate, I do hate to see innovative companies not ever have that conversation and then some number of years later find out that it really would have been better for them to seek IP protection, because at least in the case of patents, you can't wait forever to seek that protection. There are some real deadlines. After you've been selling your products, after you've published information about it, you either lose your rights in most countries immediately, or in the U.S. after a year. So you can't go back in time if you didn't seek that IP protection. So that's what I would urge people to do. At least have the conversation, at least investigate intellectual property protection, because it could be extremely valuable for you.
That is really great advice. Robert, where can people find you? And let's hear the name of that book again.
Yeah, you can find me at my firm's website, which is blueshiftip.com. That's Blue Shift and then IP as an intellectual property. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I post there all the time. It's linkedin.com/in/Robert Plotkin. And the name of the book is AI Armor. You can go to Amazon, search for it, or go to blueshift.com/AI Armor, where you can also download some free bonus content that is not in the book. It's a guide to evaluating patent versus trade secret protection for AI technology.
That sounds fantastic. I think I might be having a look at that myself. But Robert, thank you for your time today. A really interesting and informative discussion.
Thanks so much for having me and for engaging with me on this.
And we'll both be dusting off that TRS-80, maybe looking at the back of the cup and see if we can find it. Well, that's a wrap on another awesome guest episode for the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we'd be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at aiadvantage.show right now. Until next time, I'm Richard Wray, and if you're an entrepreneur, get the AI advantage today.